Greetings. I did get some communication from Dan that he has been called away, so Ridge is flying solo in the chair's chair. Who else are we waiting on here?
And was Dan going to try to join us, or is he?
I'm sorry, you were probably connecting when I said that. Dan was having trouble connecting because I think he was trying to connect to the policy committee, and then he had something that called him away. So his appearance is tenuous at best. For the likelihood of experience is tenuous at best. You are chairing alone in the chair.
I see.
So, flying solo.
I feel so powerful.
Yeah. You'll get over it, trust me.
There you go. So there are two topics for today, and hopefully they will not take an enormous amount of time, because one of them, if memory serves, we already approved and submitted to council. So it's just a matter of council deciding to pick it up and move it along. And that was the Housing Choice Mobility Fund. And I can pull up, I can pull that up and we can scan through it. But my recollection is that we've done all that we are supposed to do, and it was just a matter of council, figuring out where in their priorities it's sat. And for those of you on the subcommittee, is that your recollection as well, that we'd finalized that and endorsed it as a hack and moved it up to council? This is the
Yes.
the Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund. Do we need to look through it again, or can we just say, well, it's there and move it along?
I mean, depending on the sequence of timing here, there may be value in just doing one more look over. Just, times, many things are the same, but there may be some circumstances where things have evolved a little bit and it's worth revisiting.
All right.
So that's my recommendation.
Agreed.
All right.
So yeah, the 50-cent tour, if you would, sir.
So I don't really have a 50-cent. Let me just see if I can get this to work the way I would like it to. Like I didn't have time to prepare a PowerPoint or anything like that. So let me. Can you see this memo?
No, I've seen that Ridge Schuyler has started screen sharing.
Oh, for the love of Pete.
But apparently it's lying.
Yes, apparently it is. So this may not go as smoothly as I would like.
Never does. Let me see if I can do it. There we go. Where am I at here? Everybody see that?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll play with the cursor per your instructions.
Yeah. So, so again, just to remind everybody, this was an effort to have an alternative to the security deposit requirement for rentals, to help people who can afford the housing, but they can't afford the security deposit, et cetera. So this was an idea of trying to enlist private landlords to rent to certain tenants, but instead of requiring a security deposit, essentially this fund would provide that security deposit on the behalf of that tenant. And then there were criteria that people had to meet. And so one of the criteria was the tenant needed to be a participant in one of the listed programs there at the top. So you can see them for yourself. Those were the available assistance programs that we had. If there are additional ones, Sunshine, that might be a place where there's been a change since we did this. But that's the first thing, is like, which tenants are we talking about? Well, they needed to be participating in one of these programs.
So, well, yeah, just one quick recommendation is to add, even though there's no funding yet, but the state last year passed a housing choice voucher program at the state level. there is hope that it'll get funded this year. So we just want to make sure that it's included in this list.
Okay. So it could be CRHA and state housing choice voucher program, something like that. And then where are we next? Phil, could you go up
All
just
right,
to the,
I beg your pardon. I didn't mean to scroll that. I was scrolling something else. There you go.
and then the eligibility criteria, landlord, I'm just reading down the 1, 2, 3. Landlord must be leasing a rental unit in Charlottesville, have agreed to use the CAM fund instead of the security deposit, according to, as the Code of Virginia described there, and have a fully executed 12-month lease for that low-income household for the unit that is being guaranteed. It is eligible. The unit that is being leased is, that list there. It could not, however, be used for shared housing in which tenants rent private bedrooms but share common areas. So that would be like Commonwealth. Is it Commonwealth Crossing? I can't remember the names. Eagles Landing. Those kind of suite type setups. This would not apply to that.
One addition we should make, let me suggest, is we should add to eligible properties that manufactured housing is eligible. That is a July 2021 mandate from the state. The comprehensive plans include, that was part of the reasons we had our comprehensive plan re-up last night at the Planning Commission, was to include language that acknowledged manufactured housing as a tool.
All
Or at
right.
least say that it doesn't exclude arbitrarily manufactured housing until we come up with a policy for manufactured housing. But the requirement is we have that affordable housing needs to have a policy about manufactured housing.
All right. And then scrolling on down to eligible payments.
Sure.
This is what, so for landlords, this is what the CAM fund could be used for. You can see accrued rent, damages. We went through a lot of discussion about those 4 items and how you prove, that you are owed from the CAM fund. And I think we settled on a very good place with listing all of that. And then the amount of that payment is provided in number 2 there. Again, I don't want to, if you all want to read through it, you certainly can. It was provided in advance, and I guess we need to decide now, since we might not ever meet again.
As I recall, that discussion was designed to sort of
Track.
put for tracking materials and to put guardrails around what it would do up front. So
Right.
that's where we came up with the 3 months of rent and the maximum and the et cetera.
And we tried to track as much as possible the Code of Virginia's requirement around security deposits and what they can be used to cover, so that a landlord would not feel like if they went this route, they were somehow losing out on what the code allowed in terms of security deposits. So we really tried to hew as closely as possible to the statute to make it attractive to landlords, but also protect the city's money by not allowing, just some kind of claim of damages, in the abstract to unleash funds. Because I think under the state statute, and again, I'm really, I can barely remember my own kids' names at this point. So remembering how this all came about is a little bit even more taxing. But my recollection is that sometimes you can get a security deposit from a tenant if the tenant doesn't object. And I think we wanted to be a little bit more specific in this case to say, you got to give us the listing of what it is if the state's going to pay. So that was all in terms of eligible payments. And then in program delivery, we talked about, making sure that tenants understand that even though this isn't their money that's at risk, they need to be aware of what it takes to be a tenant and be a good tenant, so that we don't end up dipping into the fund if we don't need to. So this was to set up education program for tenants, to have somebody along to do the pre and post inspections, so that it wasn't relying just on the landlord to say what the status of the place was at the beginning and at the end, and encouraging or requiring the tenant to be in a coaching program or contribute to the fund or to the security deposit.
Can I just add something there quickly, or at least
Yep.
ask a question, which is, I know that one of the pain points from a landlord perspective I've heard relatively consistently is that the move-in inspection process often takes a long time and this is not specifically about Charlottesville, but just in general. Do we want to include something in here, or maybe this just gets at how we structure the program down the road, but just to have some level of certainty from the landlord perspective and the tenant perspective that the inspections will happen within 5 business days or whatever the appropriate time frame is?
Yeah. Can you scroll down to the bottom and see if there was a place where we said we were going to flesh out some of that stuff?
Request for payment. Now we're on a payment disqualified.
Okay, that's all about making the payments. Okay, so yeah, so that
Implementation. Here we go. Develop a process for determining the development administrator resident tenant intake and education. Developer schedule of costs and damage typically paid.
Right. So Sunshine, we'd kind of kick that to the administrator to develop a process with dates and whatnot. And maybe that's too loosey-goosey, but the thought was we're going to hire somebody to kind of operate the program and let them figure out, is it 72, what's reasonable for them to be able to do.
That's fine. Then all I would suggest then is maybe just adding a little bit to this sentence, just to say, to ensure, rapid response and that kind of thing.
Prompt, responsive, effective, blah, blah, blah. Right.
And is anybody else taking notes besides me? Just to make sure that when I make these changes, it reflects what we've talked about. But if not, that's fine. I'll just rely on my Post-it notes. So moving back up to,
I can take notes or move. Okay, just a second.
I'll take notes. I mean, it's not
there we are.
So this was the amount of eligible payments. We did that. Program delivery. So we're right in the right spot. You had to be, the tenant had to be receiving the assistance and like I said, go through the education program. Landlords needed to rent to a tenant who was in one of the programs, include in the rental agreement that they're participating in the CAM fund, present to the fund administrator a move-out inspection, which itemizes damages in the event that they wanted to, request funding from the CAM fund for, to pay that. If you could scroll on down, we're at number 3.
Nope. All right, we'll be at number 3. Hold on. There we go.
So anyway, this was all, all of the very specific, details that a landlord would need to comply with in order to have access to the funds. And how the fund administrator would know that the landlord is participating, etc. And then number 3 down there was, once the landlord requests payment, these are the things that needed to be done. And Sunshine, to your point, this was where we did put in dates so that it, and I believe, again, going off of memory, that some of these dates were included in the code. I don't remember exactly, but so the fund administrator will look within 10 days at the request and release payments within 21 days once all the information has been presented. There is provision that a tenant can be disqualified from further participation if the reason that the CAF fund was accessed was because of one of these three reasons. The idea being that if you know, that city taxpayer money went to make up for this, and the tenant, you know, bore some responsibility for these, and so not putting that city fund at risk in the future with that tenant. And then down here at the bottom with program implementation, there was you know, an amount of money to capitalize the initial landlord fund plus money to administer the program. The thought was that $75,000 would support 50 tenants. I don't know if that's still legit today. And then some requirements at the hack, develop metrics so we would know how the program was progressing. And then there were some responsibilities of the fund administrator just to let them know what the $25,000 was supposed to go toward them doing, which is really the landlord, you know, the tenant education, the processing of payment requests, and making sure that the landlord is appropriately in the program at the outset.
Just to one super quick comment, which would be under the administration of the qualification. This is nitpicky in the extreme, except if it comes up. But do we really want to limit it to just C3s? Because C4s are social service. They're social service organizations. I mean, 501c4s are now sort of tainted with being the fig leaf by which super PACs operate. But in fact, they are social service organizations. So we may want to say nonprofit, it's 501c, and then sort of designate that a 3 or a 4, or what is C6 is a trade organization. I don't think that applies, but there are a couple of different sub-infedations here that might be relevant. I don't know. Does that sound crazy?
No,
Okay, just a suggestion.
no crazier than other things I've heard.
Well, for
But
me,
is there-
that's not
is
a
there-
terribly
is there-
high bar.
Is it a feeling that it should be a nonprofit as opposed to like a property management company that decides to, you know, undertake this work?
I mean, that's a question. I mean, if they're willing to do it for a flat $25,000 fee and they feed those and they, you know, provide the service, do we care? Or do we have to
That's-
care? Are we not allowed to dispense with this money? Oh, I think we have to dispense, and Alex may answer to this. I think this is CAF money. It's got to go to a nonprofit. We don't have a choice. Alex, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I
Okay,
think we're stuck.
okay.
Hey guys, can we open this up a little bit more to either the city, nonprofit, or a quasi-government agency?
Yeah, you know, we can consider that. And just to add a little bit more to Phil's question, you know, we actually confronting with the city attorney in terms of opening the funds to actually for-profit organizations, you know, so that's a good question. You know, I think we have to clarify. She seems in favor of that, but we still need to clarify that. But Phil, that's a good question, and John as well.
Yeah, I
So,
think,
excuse me.
just
Go ahead.
real quickly on that, I think that has to go to council, obviously, because they established the cap that it has to go to nonprofit. So there would be a proposal to go to council to tweak it, I would think. But yeah, sorry, John, I didn't mean to step on you.
I mean, quasi-governments can get it now. We just got CAF money last year. We got CAF money year before that.
Yeah,
Right, the
well,
question was profit versus nonprofit was the question. But
Okay,
yeah,
yeah. I'm just asking, can we add the city as the
yeah,
city?
or other designated to receive, designated nonprofit, or others as sanctioned by the CAF, blah, 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 something like that, which includes quasi-governments. And if we decide to go to profit organizations for other things, I guess that'll work. Yeah, I agree.
So should we just say, should the language just be to CAF eligible?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's smarter. Yeah, I think, yeah.
And then if they change the CAF rules, then it just will automatically, you have to go back and change
Follow along.
this.
Rich, just while we are at this, I just want to confirm this. So what we are expecting in terms of initial investment is 75,000. Is that correct?
That is my understanding of what
Okay.
we decided way back when.
Yeah. All right.
And
Yep.
the way, and this is going into the Wayback Machine, but the
Yeah.
research shows that if you stand up these things, that actually you only end up spending the administrative money. Because one of the actions of this is that if you have a proper program and a proper contact and a proper exit interviews and all of that, that the amount of claims you end up having to process becomes vanishingly small. That this is really meant to be a reassurance to the landlord that it's available. So we need to be able to commit to spend $50,000 for fund capitalization, but the chances that we actually spend anything like $50,000, apparently, according to the folks who have stood these sorts of programs up, they really don't spend much money on it, for what it's worth. So,
And what an enormous benefit, to the tenant.
Right.
If we can get landlords to participate, and I think that's going to be the challenge, like with anything new, if they've got to, anyway. So,
yeah,
the
money
I
gets
think,
spent in dragging the landlords into this.
and to Sunshine's point, and I think as Lisa Herndon, in terms of broader, focusing on broader participation, I think, the landlord needs to see this as something that's very simple to access and use, rather than just their default using security deposits. And so, the easier the administration and on everybody, the better, the more widespread this will be used. And so hopefully as the program implementation terms get resolved, it is always with an eye to how do we make this as easy on everybody as possible so that it's as attractive as possible.
All right. Should I scroll some more here, sir?
Let's just scroll to the end because I think we're at the end.
Pilot period, 3 years.
Yep.
Program setup, average data
Right.
collection.
And we just, the only role of the hack after this is adopted is the hack should come up with the metrics by which the program will be measured to see whether or not it was effective. So if you're paying $25,000 a year for administration and only 2 people ever access it, then you might have to say, well, wait a minute, maybe that wasn't such a good use of money. But
Right,
the hack,
yeah.
the handoff to the hack is, hey, even if the council adopts this as is, there's still a role for you in determining the metrics to determine whether it's successful or not. And that's what I got on that.
So the tweaks are
State
Sunshine's-
HCB,
right.
manufactured housing to be included in the list.
Right.
To make a note that ensures that there's a rapid response as it relates to the inspections, and that the eligible fund administrator be a CAF eligible organization.
Right.
Now, if we can all agree on that, if I just make the tweaks, do I need to recirculate it to the group, or can we just say, as long as I faithfully, these don't look like they're very complicated, faithfully insert these, can we then say that this is hack approved?
Well,
Like,
the
what's
whole
the-
point of the subcommittees was to make it so that we could push the exactly this sort of thing through without waiting for the next hack meeting to decide, yes, we agreed with your changes. So absolutely. Why don't you do that? And since we may be at the end here, then
Right.
forward it to me and I'll put a quick cover note on it to Alex and Sam and Counselor Payne and say, here it is.
I see the woman in the big chair has her hand up.
Yeah. Oh, yes, she does. Hold on. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's always good for us who are going to be held accountable for what's going before city council to have a final version of what Ridge, not saying I don't trust you, but I just like to see a final version of it.
Oh, yeah. So you'll redistribute it back out. Yeah, I got you.
Also, in terms of the streamlining the inspection part of it to get tenants in early, have you all ever heard of the Modernization Act of 2016?
I haven't.
Okay. I have a document that I would like for you to also look at, Ridge, that may help answer some of these questions that you're going to leave open for city council. I also worked or served on a federal financing and housing policy voucher committee for National Association of Realtors. And we actually created a program that was very much like this. And it addressed some of these concerns. And I didn't think about it before, otherwise I would have sent it out. But I think it's something that can prove valuable. It has examples of best practices throughout the United States.
Oh, great. Wow.
So it's a document that's already been used, and it does address streamlining the inspection, because as Sunshine said, that is a big concern of landlords. And pulling on memory, my understanding is that there was a way that it was able to, the landlord and tenant was able to come in early enough to do the inspection, checking off certain things that was pre-agreed upon. And they were both signing off on the inspection of the unit, which helped to streamline it. But all that is within the document.
Terrific. I mean, why, you know, why build a wheel if you can steal somebody else's?
Best practices from throughout different states in the United States. So different states.
Yeah.
So I think we should, I think we can finalize this document, but I think we should make sure that the next hack has this document as well as this modernization document. And if the next group wants to further modify or beef this up before council has had a chance to act, there'd be an opportunity to do that. Because I think it'd be great to look at other, to best practices around. And if we've missed stuff, by all means, they should update this with those best practices.
Yeah, I'm sure if it's when it goes to council, I'm sure there will be another review of that. And of course, some of you will have the opportunity to take a look at that before it eventually goes to the city council. So
great. That's great to hear. Thank you for that.
Terrific. Yes, ask Lisa if you could, at a minimum, get that into Ridge's hands, or if you can upload it to this box, that'd be great too.
So I'll make the changes, recirculate to the group with some kind of deadline, reasonable deadline that says if we don't hear back from you all, this will be deemed to be approved or something like that. So we don't have to necessarily get back together.
Yes.
All right. So that's the Housing Choice Mobility Fund, or Housing Access, or whatever. Next was the couple of recommendations that we made with regard to what the code allows in terms of partial real estate property tax exemptions. And so if you want to pull that one up, Phil.
I can figure out a way to get this thing to, there we go. All right, let me go get it. That work?
Have a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the year.
Yeah, happy ho ho to you too.
Just trying to avoid the awkward silence.
All right. Council recommendations. There we go.
So I had, just as a reminder, we had done a couple of subcommittee meetings on this with PowerPoints and whatnot, and I had drafted some track changes to the existing ordinance. And at the end of the day, the preference was just to write a memo saying these are our recommendations and the places in the code that allow for them. And we got kind of right up to the point of adoption, and then we didn't meet it again. And so this is the memo that I wrote with the code sections and the recommendations. And you know, it may be, I don't know what the best way to go through this is. You know, it may be just to look at the recommendation. You know, I mean, Lisa, you remember, I mean, we went through a lot of thinking about how to get this to this point. And one of the, you know, one of the big questions, what constituted a low income resident? Anyway, Phil, do you have thoughts about what's the best way to go through a dry memo in this context?
Well, I mean, I don't know what's gonna wet anybody's whistle on this at all. I mean, it's I mean, we did decide to put this into a code citing dry as dust memo. So there's just, I mean, we're just gonna have to accept that we did this to ourselves. But having said that, I mean, I think maybe it's best to hit, here's the draft recommendation, and then go back to the code allows us to do this. That's why we made the recommendation, and do it in that order instead of going through the code. I mean, that might be a little brisker.
Well, so the bottom line is that the code, you know, the code limits what you can do in terms of these kinds of things. And there were two different approaches that the Code of Virginia took. One was deferring taxes for those who were renting to low income individuals, and the other was reducing taxes for folks who were renting to low income individuals, both of which were designed to be incentives to rent to low income folks. And so I think I put these in the order in which they appeared in the code. And the first one was a taxpayer could defer all or any portion of real estate taxes
Until
sale of the property. So, you know, the thought was, you know, why not adopt that provision in Charlottesville, allowing the deferral of those real estate taxes until the property passes to another owner. So that was the first one. The second was to provide a partial exemption from real estate taxes for structures or improvements within certain districts. The idea here was that this program would be available in certain districts in the city that did not include a high concentration of university students. And in the case that it was, because this is both for rentals and homeowners, low-income renters and low-income homeowners, the idea was that the partial tax exemption would be applicable for renters throughout the city, except in high-density student areas, and would be available to homeowners throughout the city, whether they are within the you know, high student concentration areas or not. And I think the thinking there was, for example, a low-income homeowner who might be living in the 10th and Page neighborhood, which is being overrun by students, they're still a low-income homeowner and should benefit from the tax deferral, even though there are students living in apartments all around them. So that was our way of trying to benefit low-income homeowners throughout the city, but not provide a tax incentive for folks who are renting to students who appear to be low income, but may have access to other capital. And Rory, you've put something in here.
Yeah, sort of kind of dropped this late. I don't remember. I think it was earlier this year that I learned this. The charter actually has tax deferral authority for and grant authority for low and moderate income homeowners, and grants for landlords. So, I mean, at its most basic, that kind of, for that first clause, would give us the authority, if we did it under the charter, to do deferrals greater than just the increase over 105% of the previous year's taxes.
And when you say the charter, whose charter?
The city charter, which is
okay,
sort of, it's granted by the state, so it's
okay. So that has given us leeway that may not be reflected in the code.
Yep,
gotcha. Oh, that's cool. So
The next one is just to kill the present program.
So I guess, Rory, what you're saying is that on some of these, we're not limited to what the code provision says. And so we should look at the charter. And my understanding from our many meetings is that we want the city to be as broad as possible in the application of the incentive as we possibly can. And if the charter provides a greater incentive to rent to or provide assistance for low-income homeowners, we are going to, as a group, encourage the city to adopt that most expansive vision of providing an incentive. Is that right? And so if the charter is more expansive, we should look at the charter.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think it really just applies to this this first recommendation about 3219.
Okay.
Because of the deferral part.
Okay.
So I guess that changes the draft recommendation to include that. And Rory, can you share that particular section of the charter with, with the group, or at a minimum with Ridge? So
yep, I just sent it to the webinar.
Yeah, can you send it to my email too, Rory? That'd be great, because when the webinar closes,
good point.
So that's going to be a kind of a major shift. How do we want to handle that? Should we do it the same way that we are doing for the? It's just the Housing Choice Mobility Fund went through a lot of, iterations and whatnot, and so I think circulating it with a hey, unless anybody objects, we're moving forward. This seems a little bit more substantial. I
would suggest, just as an overarching thought here, is that we let Ridge, the formally frocked lawyer, review that with care. And if you think, Ridge, that it's sufficient to say, just to add language, share the language so we can all read it, obviously, but add language if it's appropriate to add language referencing the charter, or explain to us why it isn't, and circulate it.
And the circulation, should it require that people respond, or should it be like, I worry about.
Why don't you send it to me, and I'll put a cover on it that sort of makes it very clear. This is an amendment to something that we had approved back at the beginning of the year. If you have objections, speak now, or by X day, or forever hold your peace.
Rory, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think what you can do could be as simple as really the draft recommendation is the same, right? We recommend the city create a deferred real estate program. And so it's really probably just adding a sentence to that top paragraph to say, there are these two sections of state code, and then also there's this charter section. And we recommend you do it under one of those.
Right.
Okay, that's a good point. Okay.
And again, if it does fit into the box in the way that Ridge in his lawyerly way thinks, this will work. There may be some, but yes, I agree. I think that makes most sense. If you can get away with that, Ridge, then it's just to recirculate. Here's our updated. It's still the same recirculation. We've made the changes.
Yep. So to ask Lisa's question, I think so. It seems to me that as long as we're focused on making sure that the entities that benefit from this are renting to low-income individuals or are themselves low-income homeowners, it should be hitting the target that we want to hit, which is to encourage more of that, regardless of kind of the status of who is doing the renting. So it seems like expanding the incentive.
I'm sorry, would we at all be concerned about corporate landlords? Individuals coming into low wealth neighborhoods, buying up the property and then benefiting from this? Is that the landlord that we want to benefit from this?
Well,
I'm just trying to play devil's advocate to look at things.
So yes, yeah. So the question is, do we care, right? Do we care if a corporate landlord comes in, buys up 40, let's say, just to pick a substantial number, 40 houses to rehab them for low income renting and then rents to low income people. And they benefit by deferred or lowered taxes for a period of time. Does that squick us for some reason? And I'm not sure it does. I mean, I guess it's just the same old story of whoever's got the money can do it better and faster than people who don't have the money. Right? I mean, I don't disagree with you, S. Lisa. I just don't, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, is there an unknown consequence here that we're not thinking about? Probably.
That could be further damaging or adding just a horrible impact to the neighborhoods beyond what we're aiming to do. Because I mean,
guess
that's a real concern with a lot of neighborhoods, and especially a lot of African American neighborhoods. So I'm just putting it on the table for us to consider. It doesn't mean that we have to change anything, but I think it should be a part of what we consider and part of the conversation.
maybe some
Yeah.
sort of limitation on number of units a given entity can do this for, or number of properties you could do it for, you know, and make that number that is very good for a mom and pop sort of operation, but not worth the trouble for a monster company. And exclude nonprofits from that.
So I think what Lisa is putting on the table is one to consider down the road also. Because we're hearing nationally from other low income groups, tax credit groups, where once either the tax credit has ran out and the land and a private landlord or a corporation comes in, they buy it for 1 year, rent goes up, and then they'll sell it to another, rent goes up. And to me, that's something that we should be thinking and wrapping our brains about, so that won't happen. So I do agree with Lisa that it should be on the table, that we talk about it and investigate it.
Yeah.
One quick thought, and this may be a proxy that is too limiting, but maybe not, is to consider that only that it excludes any properties owned by LLCs.
Yeah, I think that might be too restrictive, particularly since there are many, many, many mom and pops who own two
Right.
rental properties that are in LLCs. And I think that that's sort of, it may be the number of units that a given entity can do, period. Except if
like
you're a
that idea,
nonprofit,
too.
Unless you're a nonprofit. I mean, if Sunshine can figure out a way to do this with 140 houses, more power to him. But, you know, we said, and I don't know what that number is. But
If it's 3 or more, you're a professional landlord.
but I'm not necessarily thinking that that's it may be like 5 in the city, right? I mean, if you're a mega corporation, guess what? You own 5 duplexes. All right, whatever, but not 50. Yeah.
Putting a certain number on it will probably be the best thing that we can do.
Yeah.
At this
and
point,
I don't know what
but
that number
definitely
is.
keep it on the radar, because you don't want to create a monster of a situation that you didn't intend to. That's going to leave the neighborhood worse than what it was before, because you're incentivizing certain entities to come into those neighborhoods who are already looking out, being predators, and then this is further incentivizing them. We don't want to do that unintentionally.
Yeah, good points all. So
Is that a new song, Phil?
no, that's me half reading aloud. So Ridge, since you authored this document, can you perhaps think of an elegant way to include that concept?
Yeah, I'm wrestling in my mind. I mean, I just wonder if this is substantial enough and unknown enough that it just can't be resolved in the last meeting of the policy subcommittee for the existing hack, and whether this should be further considered by the next hack that can have more information than we have and come up with a, with a more thoughtful answer than just, limiting the number. Because I haven't had a chance to think about it at all myself, and all I, my recollection from our meetings earlier in the year was that the tax incentive that comes from partial exemption of your real estate taxes is not enough. It's not much of an incentive, and it's really just a reward for people who are going to do this anyway, as opposed to an incentive for people to all of a sudden decide to rent to low income, individuals, as opposed to market rate paying individuals. My overall sense of this back when was it's not much of an incentive. It's more like a reward for doing the right thing. Thinking back to when Rebecca, one of our citizens, said, I rent to low income people because I want to, and it would be nice if somebody would give me a little bit of a break here and there for doing so. So I'm just wondering if I don't want to send anything to council that's going to have unintended consequences and further undermine neighborhoods that have already been, attacked. I just don't know if I know enough to say this is the right answer to make sure that we create an incentive for low income homeowners and tenants without doing damage to existing neighborhoods. I just don't know that I know enough to say this is the recommendation that we ought to submit to council at this stage. And so I'm just nervous about promoting something.
Just what you said is fine, in my opinion, we can still submit it, and with a recommendation of considering limiting the units, the number of houses that the landlord can purchase in that neighborhood for this, but I don't think that holding off on it is going to do a service either, because there are owners out there who could benefit from this.
Yeah, I think maybe just some simple language saying, with appropriate guardrails to, either in a limitation in the number that an entity can process per year, which also has the same thing. A mom and pop, if you say you can only do 2 of these per year, that's 1.5 more than most of them are going to be able to handle anyway. So fine. Good. Or something like, aggregate number owned by a single entity to prevent, aggregation or something like that. Something just sort of general language.
So we could certainly put in cautionary language to make sure that somebody is looking at this without us making a firm recommendation of what that answer might be. That seems right to me.
Yeah.
Does that seem like what we're saying?
Tweaked along the way. It can be tweaked the next time it rolls out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to have language that's more warning about the problem than prescribing like a solution. Because I'm also pretty torn on this. Like, would you want to not let a dogwood housing kind of situation access this? Especially, if they're already providing affordable housing versus buying up new houses and starting things. I agree, it needs more thought.
But some sort of general statement that do care, et cetera, to prevent aggregation and, neighborhood trouble, basically, and broad trouble, either in the number of units per year per landlord, or the total number that can be owned or done or accessed within a certain period of time, or some other method, depending on what the risks and hazards on analysis prove to be. And just be general about that, just so that we've got it as a placeholder for now. Does that make sense? So.
That's the value of having different perspectives at the table.
Yes, indeed. It's a smart thought. Because there's somebody out there trying to figure out a way to work this, whatever this is. Someone's out there trying to work it. Yeah. All right. So Ridge, anything else we need to look at in this thing? I mean, you've got the eligibility, I think is pretty straightforward.
We didn't settle on the eligibility. Let's see, we did not settle on the deferral one, which could be expanded, under the charter. The owner occupant, we didn't settle on a area median income for that, which is why it's bracketed. We said 50%, but there was still some discussion, which is why it's sitting there as 50.
The question mark after that 50% to make it clear that the bracket really means we don't know.
Yeah, and I can't quite remember why that one was more troubling than the others, where we did pick a number.
I think it had to do with where we wanted to provide the relief, and that we were looking at a population who would benefit from it correctly, to the way we were thinking. And the 50% was, right, this sort of needs to fit in with the other tax deferral programs that we have. What is 50%? How many people are we really talking about in that section? And we just didn't have the data to know. And this is something that Alex can turn someone loose on to rummage for, to figure out the numbers, that we just didn't have the data to know what that number should be. And we were afraid of being just dead wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was easier to figure out with the rents, but when you have the owner who has the asset, then you're getting into what's dead on the property, how long they've been there, what's the real situation, and we just weren't able to sort of figure that out. So, yeah, boy, we did a lot of work on this.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. I think there's a note at the very bottom. If you could scroll all the way to the bottom.
Oh, you mean beyond the part where we said we wanted this in place by July of 2022?
Yep. I just wanted to raise this, which is there was, these recommendations were arrived by consensus, with the exception that a member of the housing recommended the landlord exemption be available only to landlords renting at tenants earning 30% or less of area median income. And I think, so there was a lot of discussion about who should qualify as a low income renter for purposes of all of these exemptions. And I think there was a lot of back and forth about whether it should be what we came up with, or whether it should be focused on, the most housing burdened. And I think the consensus was that it should be a little bit broader than the most housing burdened, but there was not unanimity on that view. And I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that there was not unanimity on that view.
Right. And I think one of the discussions is that we're at 30% or less of median income, those landlords are already getting 100, if they're getting under vouchers, they're getting 125% of market rate. In some cases, they're getting all sorts of other benefit. And that there is this section of, and I hate to call it workforce housing, but of folks at the 50-60% medium income level, where this might provide some incentive. But if you're at 30% or less, to me, this is not going to incentivize or encourage anybody who's already renting at 30% or less under those programs to do most of this, and they're already getting the benefit. Not to dismiss it at all, but just to restrict it to that point might be a little too tight, and that we're trying to do something a little different. That was my recollection.
And could you scroll back up to show people what the number is that we actually settled on for renters?
Rents out at 50 or less, charges of the rent itself at 25%, verifies annually.
An exemption lasts as long as they're continuing to rent to low income tenants based on initial qualification. And that was, a lot of discussion about when, let's say they're a low income renter, a low income tenant, and then they scramble up the income ladder. We didn't want them to be tossed out. So it was based on initial, their initial qualification.
Right, but we do have an annual verification system in
Right.
there too.
Right, to make sure that they're not charging more than 25% of that person's
Right, so the
income
rent is
as rent.
verified. Yeah.
Yep. I think the idea was once you're in your home, your rent should not ever be more than 25% of your income. But if you start moving up the income scale, you shouldn't lose your housing. And that was the thought.
Well, based on initial qualification, the rent is
Based
not
on
exceed
initial
25%.
qualification, exactly.
I think that's what covers us. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, although it's a parenthetical, it should probably also be bold. Right. Okay, sir. Anything else on this?
That's all I had. And there are examples of other communities that are doing this, so that and that's one of the reasons that I went away from the track changes on the ordinance, was that there are other ordinances that have been adopted across Virginia making use of these provisions that the city could grab and repurpose, rather than trying to reconfigure the old ordinance that didn't really meet a lot of these standards. So that's what we got.
All right. Any further discussion on this?
So we'll put guardrail language in there to make sure that we are not incentivizing the further destruction of vulnerable neighborhoods. And I think that was the only, and the charter information, including that in the deferral section, that there's a provision beyond the code that might give us some wiggle room.
And I would suggest that we adjust the proposed start date or delete it. Unless you're in possession of a DeLorean and or police call box.
To July 1, 2025.
So.
Given how slowly the wheels turn. So I guess we'll start at the next tax year, the next fiscal year, which would be July 1, 2023.
Yes, I think so. All right.
All right,
sir.
and so we'll do this the same way, which is I'll make these minor changes. We'll circulate to the group with a date by which suggested changes be made. We'll I guess have to deal with it if lots of suggested changes are made. I don't really know what we'll do after that, but we'll just cross that bridge when we get to it, if we get to it. That's it. Thus ends my co-chairmanship of the policy subcommittee of the Housing Advisory Committee, and what a ride it has been.
Don't be too quick to get dashing out the door. We may end up with another meeting or two, depending on how council proceeds.
Can you see how old and tired I've become? I don't know if I can do anymore.
I don't know. You've always looked ancient to me.
Oh, thank you. It's the wisdom that's emanating from the halo behind my head.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a special
Thank you
polish you
all.
buy for the
There
top
you
of
go.
your head
Yes.
there to create that? All right. Well, sir.
Well,
Do we
thank
have?
you all
Let
for
me
your
stop sharing here and
yep.
see if we have. Let's see. And I want to see if we have. Do we have any members of the public out there to speak to us? Elise, once again. So, all right. Well, sir, you're still in the chair. You want to wrap this up?
Does anybody have a motion to adjourn?
I just have a FYI. I just want to thank
Shoot,
you guys.
I almost did it.
I want to thank you guys for all your support, and I'm sure after we get complete applications, enough applications, and then review it, that Some of you will return to Hack or CAF or what have you. And having said that, I hope you guys have a great Christmas. And also remember that the City Council passed an ordinance which will take effect on January 1st, 2023, which is the plastic bag ordinance. You know, so if you go to grocery store after January 1st, you know, if you don't have your own bag, you know, reusable bag, then they're gonna have to charge you 5 cents. So remember that, and then pass that along to your constituents. Thank you.
Right.
I move to adjourn.
Do I hear
I
a
will-
second?
I will second that.
All right.
Is there any discussion? Do we discuss at this point? Anyway, I do also wanted to add my note of thanks of all of the work that you all have put into this over the many, many years. I was looking back at my notes. There are a lot of us that have been at this for a long time, and I do feel like, you know, that there's progress being made, and it's, you know, it's painfully slow, but no progress will be made without the input of people as smart and caring as you all. So thank you for what you have done to this point, and keep on doing it. So with
Sure.
that, is there for all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Or bye.
Any opposed? I think the ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Rich.
Sir.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy ho ho ho.